Hey, so Mike, you have 2 minutes for your introductory remarks.
Great. So my name is Mike O'Brien. I'm just finishing my first term on the City Council, so I have about 3.5 years experience doing this work. A little bit about myself. I was born here in Seattle, raised in the area. I'll tell you that my background is in finance. I worked for the last 10 years before being a council member as a chief financial officer of a law firm in town. I have an MBA in finance from University of Washington and an economics degree from Duke University. My access to politics, though, was not through finance. It was through environmental activism. I've been a volunteer with the Sierra Club, big grassroots, 100-plus-year-old organization for about 15 years. And it was through work on climate change and transportation issues that I got involved in politics and eventually quit my job at the law firm and made the switch to advocacy. A little bit of the things that I've worked on since I've been on council. Certainly environmental stewardship is something that's a passion of mine. I've continued to work on that. Issues around creating an opt-out list for yellow pages, committing the city to being a carbon neutral city by the year 2050, plastic bag ban, working on district energy. But I've also worked a lot on social justice issues since I've been on council, and that's probably the work that I'm most proud of. Established the Safe Parking Program, a pilot program for folks living in their vehicles. I started at the beginning of this Great Recession, and we saw a lot of people that had lost housing and struggling to make a go of it living in vehicles. And the city, frankly, didn't have any solutions for that population. And so we didn't have a lot of resources at the time, but we worked with the community members and a lot of faith-based organizations, churches, who said, we want to help, we just need the city's hand in doing that. And so now we have 5 church parking lots, mostly in North Seattle. We're looking to expand the program. 20 parking spots for people living in vehicles. And we've had about, I think, 40 households have transitioned through that program back into stable housing in the last year and a half. And so we're seeing some progress there.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mike.
Okay.
What do you think are the 3 biggest challenges that Seattle needs to address within the next 4 years? And what do you think council needs to do about it? And you have a very quick 2 minutes to describe.
Touch all of them. I know the next question is a similar question over the long term, and I had trouble discerning between a 4-year and, I'm going to tell you the same. So let's go through both of those.
Okay.
I'll work my way up. I think transportation is a critical issue and will continue to be. It's a growing city. We have constrained spaces both geographically and how the city's built out, and we're going to have more people trying to get around. And so how we address mobility, it's expensive, it's contentious. No matter what we do, it's going to require us all to rethink how we get around, and that's never a fun thing to work on. Let's see, things that we need to do at the City Council. We need more resources for sure. Right now we're talking about a 17% cut to Metro service in the next year at a time when we should be talking about how do we expand our public transit service. We have to figure out how those who need automobiles can get around, how our freight navigates the system, but we can't do it without investment, and frankly right now the state has not given us very many tools to make those investments, the investments that I think the people in Seattle want to make. Next thing, public safety. It's an ongoing challenge. Frankly, we're talking a lot about the Department of Justice consent decree right now and what's going on there. It's certainly a hot topic today, but I don't think what's happening today is significantly different than what's happened throughout the history of Seattle. We all have phones with cameras on them now, so we get to film things, and we're seeing things that we had just heard of before and could doubt, and now we no longer can doubt that happens. Specifically how law enforcement relates with communities of color in the city and the types of discrimination that I think we think in Seattle doesn't really happen anymore, but it clearly is going on, and we need to be able to address that. I've talked a lot about the viaduct in the last 3.5 years, so I'm going to hold that one for a little bit. But one of the ones that I think is the biggest one is the issue that we continue to face around income inequality. And we simply cannot have a society that functions where a handful of people are continuing to get more and more of the resources and the vast majority of people are getting fewer and fewer of the resources and are stuck. Certainly those of us that are kind of in the middle, I think we're doing okay and we feel okay, but that's a shrinking pie, and we're getting closer and closer to that part where we feel like we're on the bottom end of that. And we certainly know people in our communities, our family members, our neighbors, whatever, who have fallen off that side and are really struggling. And the system is broken, and it's much bigger than what we can deal with alone at the City Council, but we can address that. We can address it through things like affordable housing issues, through our human service programs. But ultimately, I believe we have to address it by making sure that people can make a living wage in the city, and they're not relying on the government to subsidize them. And that's what this country was built on, and that's the story we tell ourselves and our kids about what's great about America. And yet, when we look at the data, that's not really happening.
You've one more, since you combine those together, you have one more minute. Can you describe what you think would be done to address those issues in the near term?
Sure.
And what are long-term the ways to address those?
So let me start with income inequality. I mean, I think the discussions we're currently having as a community, a little bit council-driven, but really community-wide, around what's a fair wage rate, I think are really important. We're seeing in SeaTac a $15 an hour minimum wage. It's certainly talked about what do we do in Seattle. The fast food workers are striking. I don't know what a solution is, frankly, at the city of Seattle, but I know we can do better. And I think I'm looking forward to making sure we have that discussion in the short term.
So you think within a 4-year period we could have a $15 an hour minimum wage? Is that what you're alluding to?
That is not what I'm saying.
Okay.
I think a huge minimum wage jump like that, especially in a complex city like Seattle, poses a lot of challenges. But I think there are things that we can do. And whether it's different minimum wages in different areas or different I don't know what the answer is, but I do know there are a lot of great people thinking about it, and I think we need to have that conversation, and I'm committed to working on that. Long term, there's things like tax reform, and as Dennis, I think, mentioned it earlier. It's absurd that we live in a city where we look around and say, all these people are struggling and there's nothing we can do about it because we just don't have the resources. And then we turn our head and look on the other side of the block and see massive amounts of resources, both public and private, being deployed for things that we may or may not think are priorities. And so we have it within us to fix it. We just, part of it is a human structural thing that we need to change.
Okay, final, very quickly, what would you like to accomplish within the next 4 years if you're reelected?
On transportation, I want to find new funding so that the city can control, has some ownership over where we're going, especially on public transit. I think we need a public transit system where folks can say, I can get where I need to go reliably, safely. I can count on the system. It works. And right now, that's a partnership between the city and Metro, and it will continue to be. But we need to. I'm tired of telling people, like rooms like this, that I really want to work on it, but I can't, and we got to blame the state. Yes, it's the state's fault, and we're going to have to find solutions here. And if we can't do it without state, that's one of the areas I want to work on in the next 4 years for sure. Affordable housing is another area that I think is critically important. Right now, I'm leading the council's effort with some national consultants on really trying to understand what we do. We talk about affordable housing and affordability in the city on everything we do. I don't think we really have a comprehensive strategic plan to address it. We have a lot of great components, but I think we need to step back and say, what is the city going to look like in 5 years, in 20 years? Who's going to be living here? How much are they going to make in? How are they going to afford to live in the city? And what are our plans to make sure we address those needs?
Very good. We have a Bridging the Gap levy that's going to be renewed in 2015. Mm-hmm. We have obviously a huge backlog. We've had SDOT come in and talk to this group about up to $2 billion, and that's just looking at arterials. 60% of our roads inventories are non-arterials, and that's not even audited, or we don't even understand. But many of us know that many of our side streets are just in horrible disrepair. So we're talking about billions of dollars. In how big would you like to see the Bridging the Gap renewal be?
I don't have a number for you yet. I would like to be working a lot on transportation in the coming years, and it's an area that I would love to be leading that discussion or playing a leadership role in that discussion. I supported Bridging the Gap, and I will support it going forward, I'm almost certain. But I'll also acknowledge that because of a number of things, Bridging the Gap has not lived up to the promise that was made when it started. And I will put a lot of that on the recession that hit, that wasn't anticipated at the time we passed it. But the compact when Bridging the Gap was passed, it was before my time on the council, but it was, look, hey, we have a huge backlog. Let's take a one-time hit and go in there and deal with the backlog so we can get caught up, and then we'll stay on top of it. Recession hit. We lost a lot of funding. SDOT is largely funded through general fund money, and so that took a disproportionate hit. And I think we did what we had to do and the right thing. And a lot of that money that was going to go for major repairs and retrofits got reinvested. We got reinvested in just kind of keeping the system operational. And we ran into similar challenges around the Parks Levy, where we were faced with building new community centers and shutting down existing community centers because we didn't have the money to operate them. And that type of system doesn't make sense. So I think we have to go back and look at, again, the backlog. We're going to have to convince the public that, hey, we know we didn't do what we said we did last time around, and hopefully justify it and get them to say, here's what we're going to do going forward. I also think that within that package is probably part of the answer to how we solve our public transit needs too. If the state doesn't give us the tools we need, then I think bridging the gap's an area where I'm going to look to be
I
rescued.
think we had a follow-up question from the
Yeah.
floor.
Yeah, I take issue with the blame that you assign to the recession. I think a large chunk of the Bridging the Gap funds that voters like me thought was going to go to bridging the maintenance gap, i.e. repaving streets, a huge chunk of that money was diverted to Mercer Street and other shiny new objects in the city's capital agenda. If you repeat that again, this voter, who
Yeah.
is a reliable pro-tax voter, I'm gonna be out there thumbs down like we were on the $60 car tabs. I mean, you've got to focus on what is important, and right now, it's the goddamn pavement. The buses run on pavement. I don't know how many different bus routes you ride on occasionally.
Most in the city.
But they're terrible. The experience is terrible because they're going over streets. They're driving on streets with failed pavement. And the buses rattle and shake and rock and roll, and it's a horrible experience. Bicycles, the same thing. I had a cyclist nearly swerve into the side of my car the other day,
Avoiding a pothole.
diverting around a pothole. Pavement isn't just for cars. When you read some of the urbanista blogs, they're down on repaving the streets because, that's going to favor cars.
No, I agree. We need the pavement for all modes, and as a guy that rides his bike a lot of places, and when I'm not riding a bike, I'm on transit, there's nothing that puts a smile on my face when I'm riding my bike on a smooth pavement, and so we need to do it. Now,
So the next time somebody comes along and says, we don't need to bother with pavement, we need a new streetcar line to Ballard, it's that. No.
Amen, brother.
Mike, you alluded to the metro funding issue. It's looking pretty bleak.
One part of his question was also about.
Mercer.
We were not told what things were going to be used for and changing. These change orders by the city council is not a trust building exercise. And do you have anything to say about that?
I don't have the numbers off the top of my head about the funding for Mercer. The Mercer East and Mercer West combined is about a $300 million project. I think about $130 million of that is federal money. The rest of the pieces and which parts we're bridging the gap and not. There's a way for us to tell that story, I think, that shows how we did it. But I think it's important that we also acknowledge that the federal money we got for that program is federal money we could have got for other programs too. And so it's a little disingenuous when we say, well, if we didn't build Mercer, we wouldn't have got the money. We could have said, our number one priority is transit in this corridor, and that's what we're going after federal money for. Or there are plenty of bridges, South Park Bridge, those types of things that we could have done too. So, so specifically, I don't know enough about the Bridging the Gap history and if things were diverted from Bridging the Gap to pay for Mercer. I know Mercer's been on the books for a long time under prior administrations. But it is true that we have to admit, when we put our priorities on something, we chose that, and we have to own that. And, $300 million in that one neighborhood, I struggle with that. I mean, it's $30 million alone to widen it from 4 lanes to 6 lanes under Aurora, and I was like, gosh, $30 million is a lot of money that could be used really well throughout the city.
Did you vote for any diversion?
I think that was all done before Mike's time. Okay. Mike, you alluded to the metro issue that we have.
Yeah.
We moved our location here. Some of our members now have upwards of a 2-hour bus ride to get here. So even though we're in the central area, it's very difficult to get around town. Light rail some of the projects are 10 years out, up to Northgate, is near term, but those are spine kind of solutions and not reaching out further into the
It's not a
city.
network yet.
Right. What will you do to help make sure the public transit capacity is adequate for the city as it grows?
Well, first of all, as I mentioned, it's so maddening to me that at a time when the buses are already full, that system's stressed, And I talk to people who ride the bus and say, I want more service, and I talk to people that don't ride the bus and they're in their car and say, I would love to ride the bus if it just went where I went when I needed to go there. That we're going to spend the next 6 months or year trying to figure out how not to do 17% cuts to Metro, instead of talking about how do we build the system that we want and are willing to pay for and deserve. And so one of the things that I want to figure out how to do is, in that process, how do we shift this debate? Because I'm tired of Olympia, controlling the purse strings. And we do have alternatives. They're not great, I think progressive taxes that the state could allow us to have to fund transit is what we really want. But the alternative of having cuts is the only thing I want to do worse than doing a regressive tax to fund transit is to not fund transit. And if those are our choices, then that's what I think we need to do. And I think, frankly, from the city, I would love to see us be a little more proactive on transit, as opposed to reacting what the state or the county do, and really define what we want to do.
Other municipalities, including virtually everyone of them around us, charge developers impact fees, which then go into things like roads and streets and transit and so on. Would you be supportive of impact fees in Seattle?
It's one of the tools we have, one of the few tools we have for funding the programs. And so I'm certainly open to that. When I've looked at it by the numbers and how it would actually work, and I'm not an expert on this bill, but it hasn't demonstrated to me like a huge potential to do much, frankly. And so if folks have ways where they say impact fees can fund things and it makes sense, I want to look at anything that's possible.
We have. I'm going to take one follow-up question from the floor.
That's what I was
Jump.
going to do.
Okay.
Part of the problem and conflict that I see at City Council is you have streets that were dominantly put in place in Seattle in the 20s and 30s. And yet your operations of Seattle, your fire engines are now too heavy to adequately go on the streets. Your transit system is exempt from
The weight limits.
fees in terms of maxed out equipment on the street that's declining and making repairs needed. Even your garbage trucks are exempt and the weight limit. So your major operations makes the system break down in your street capacity throughout Seattle. So we're basically feeding ourselves poison and killing ourselves slowly because our street surfaces aren't able to sustain the weight. You don't understand that, and you keep making exceptions, which just increases and compounds the problem. Until you resolve that and get a better balance on that, you're just you're eating your own babies. So I gotta stop it.
Okay. Was that a question or a statement? I was trying to keep them to be
Let me-
questions.
let me-
Mike.
How do you resolve
Let me
that?
address-
How do you get it?
So the exempting them from the fees, ultimately, we are all paying those fees. The garbage contract is back a contract with the city, so it just increase our rates. Fire truck, that's the city. The buses, it's the county. So what we need to do, I think it's less about the exemption and more that we have an overall plan and if we have these heavy vehicles, what is the most cost-effective way to build a transportation system that accommodates it? Is it to have to replace our road services every 5 years? Is that the most cost-effective way? I mean, what we're seeing now is as we replace roads and corridors, we're they're better designed. We're putting concrete on the curb lanes where the buses and stop and run. But I can't defend that the system is working extremely well right now, and so I think it's something we need to look
Are
at.
any of the purchasing people of any of these agencies considering the weight of vehicles and what vendors they might go to reduce the weight? I mean, I don't think that's even in the equation. I don't think they're even talking about that. If they're talking about number of people that will hold.
I don't, yeah.
You know.
I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I obviously in Metro, they're looking for as many people for one driver that they can accommodate, and there's a,
So the city
it's-
council needs to ask them to look a little bit more.
Rick?
In Heller Lake, Broadview, Bitter Lake, we now have the first concrete sidewalk that's been laid in that area since it was annexed by the city back 50 years ago.
Since Eisenhower.
Yeah, something like that. It runs from Greenwood Avenue for 4 blocks. It almost goes over, it goes over to where the cement sidewalk that Lowe's Hardware had to put in order to build it. So we've got about 3 blocks of cement sidewalk. It's the only cement sidewalk that's been put in, period, in all these years. And it just went in on one side of the street, and the city has said they can't do the other side. But we're so grateful for that one little stretch. It gives us something to look at and dream about. Maybe I'm gonna have something like this in front of my house.
Is there a question, Rick?
What can you do to get me by the cement sidewalk?
You know, if we keep people hungry for 50, 60, 70 years, then they're really grateful for 3 blocks.
You betcha.
You know, I think bridging the gaps, and I mean,
I think that backlog includes, that billions of dollars includes things like sidewalks
Yeah.
in the north and the south end.
and you know, the sidewalks are so tough because to do them right and address our drainage issues and, you know, what other utility things have to go in on ADA accessibility, which are all things that I agree with. You know, we're looking at $1 million a block, and it's just,
So it's financially infeasible. The carbon footprint of concrete's pretty high. You know, are there alternatives that the city should be looking at to putting sidewalks everywhere? Do you have any ideas on that?
you know, we've seen more cost-effective, we've seen asphalt sidewalks and little curbs, and,
I've got an asphalt sidewalk, doesn't have any curbs, but it's ever so much better than the mud.
Yeah.
We petitioned the city 15 years ago, and I went around door to door and collected signatures to get sidewalks put around Haller Lake. And they hired a little 3-man paving crew to do it. Actually, it was 2 men and a woman. Came and they did that work with their outdated, obsolete equipment, and they did a magnificent job. They didn't have anything. My God, their whole paving, all of their equipment must cost about what the
So-
city
Okay,
pays
let's
for.
let's try and keep it as questions.
what I will say.
More of these 3 men.
So I think-
3 persons
I think looking at more affordable solutions
on
for
the job
sure.
Instead of the Cadillac guys, the Lincoln guys on the.
We need,
Okay, very good, Rick.
we need to address, whatever we do needs to address drainage issues for sure. I mean, we're looking at what's happening in Colorado. I hope we don't have those types of events here, but we know the climate is changing. So we just gotta be smart, but I think there are more cost-effective ways. And in places like Aurora, frankly, where we are investing in more transit there, you know, I've caught in the bus out there. It's absurd. You can't walk safely along Aurora to the bus stops. And so we do need to make significant investments in those.
Jan.
That's true, and you can't even drive up Aurora now.
Jan,
You just
Jan,
take
Rick,
that one lane of transit only.
Mike, I'm really interested in having you focus on the income side, the revenue side, especially with your background. Why can't the city take a much harder look on development impact fees? I mean, I think you glossed over it, and I've heard every candidate for years simply shrug shoulders and say it can't be done, but there's never any study. No one looks at it in a real hard-headed way. Can you pledge to do that if you're elected?
I will pledge to do that. And let me tell you how, at least, I currently view, and I evolve on things too. I mean, that's why I come to these events. You know, we're taking a hard look right now at affordable housing in developers. And one of the things trying to understand is, as we make policy changes, how does that impact, you know, the feasibility of and the cost of land ownership, and how does that translate into affordability of units? You know, there's things that we can do that some will argue, you know, well, you just keep adding cost, all that means I'm going to do is just charge more and more rent for places. You know, I took Economics 101 and I understand the very simple, you know, supply and demand, but I know that this market is much more complex than that. And trying to understand those complexities, I suspect that where I am right now is that there's a host of things that we can do to say, like, hey, when you do development, you're required to do that. Whether it's affordability or development fees or transportation, to the developer at the end of the day, it's just money. And I think we can do a much better job of capturing some of that for whatever we decide is a priority and figuring out how to do that over time so that it doesn't completely disrupt some of the things that I think are good for the economy, but not simply saying, we can't touch that because we don't want to, hurt the goose that lays the golden egg.
Quick suggestion,
Okay.
affordable housing is older housing. Don't, in other words, the development should be for people who can pay for it, but there's plenty of, as housing matures, it becomes an affordable level. Don't put money on that end for affordable. Thank you.
Mike, I want to talk a little bit about growth management.
Okay.
Seattle is at its 20 years growth management plan. For 2024, we've basically, by this point in time, we've achieved that growth target. We're like 10 years ahead of that growth target. We're about to go through another growth management planning cycle with 2015, where we've adopted, the council adopted last year, the PSRC targets of another 70,000 households into Seattle, which is about 120,000 people, and a 20% increase in population over the next 20 years. How would you like to see that population distributed throughout the city? And do you believe that we have adequate infrastructure and amenities to support that growth?
Not all in your neighborhood, Bill.
That's potentially a good place. In the central area, close into town, that's a good idea.
I think that, my issues on climate change and
Yes.
the growing world population, and, this is a complex question, and where is Seattle's role in it? And where I am today is, one is, I think the global population growth needs to come under control, and I think the best way to do that is, as we lift communities worldwide out of poverty, birth rates slow down, and that's how we're going to achieve that. That's where I am on the best path to it. So that's something that needs to happen out there. Meanwhile, we have this very attractive city that is a job generator, that people want to move here for a variety of reasons, and I'm in a place where I feel like I want to share my city with folks, but I want to be really intentional about what the city looks like. I want to make sure that we're smart about how that growth happens. It's great that it's great that we've achieved our growth targets 10 years in advance, but what that means is we're going to get more growth. And I'm okay with that, and I just want to be really smart about it. So where do those people need to go? They need to go places, frankly, where we have as much of the infrastructure in place already, or we can make that infrastructure investment in a cost-effective way. So we're making a lot of investments in transit along the spine of the Sound Transit line. We're talking about expanding it a little spurs, whether Ballard or West Seattle get something, I don't know yet, but those are ideas. And so those are kind of logical places, I think, for a lot of the growth to happen. I think on the one hand, our infrastructure is challenged significantly, in part because, whether we're talking about roads or wires or pipes, they're all put in about 50, 60, 70 years ago, and at a time when it was much more cost-effective to do, and we didn't have the environmental regulations.
Ours are 90 years.
And, it's absurdly expensive to replace that. And I've seen the pictures from the inside of those. It's amazing.
We can't run a camera through one of our big ones because it collapsed 15, 20 years ago.
And so how I think on the one hand, like from Seattle City Light, we've managed to grow significantly since the 70s without increasing significantly our electric demand because we've really focused on conservation. Seattle Public Utilities on the water side has done a good job on that too. And, on the transportation side, I think we can do it too. I mean, we don't think of public transit as conservation, but it is. I mean, if we can figure out how more people can get around with less resources, that's what we do good in the city. And if we're smart about that, I think we can accommodate it. But there's also no doubt that there is significant investment that also needs to occur on that infrastructure to meet the needs. And we're seeing that in places like Ballard where, it's already transportation challenged to begin with, and we've added a bunch more people, and we haven't been able to make the investments.
Okay, Bob?
We have two sites in the Rainier Valley that are industrial. The Pepsi bottling plant and the Dairy Queen bottling plant. They provide family wage jobs. The city council has zoned both of those properties C1 65-foot height limits. I don't want to see those replaced with Walmart. So are you willing to work on land use issues to preserve the industry that we have, and also to zone out the big boxes that kill the neighborhood stores?
The big boxes, especially the big boxes that don't treat their workers in what I would say is fair, I am united in folks in opposition to them. And what tools we have to do that you know, that's going to be something that's an ongoing battle because those folks want to come here. I mean, the best thing would be to happen is to make sure that no one here ever shopped at any of those stores because then they wouldn't be able to survive. But, you know, we've seen in other cities that don't want them that they sometimes are successful, and so we got to fight that. As far as preserving the industrial uses, you know, I've toured that Pepsi bottling plant and I've talked to some of the people that work there, and it's great to have good paying, you know, I would call blue collar jobs in the city. And, you know, the way things are growing, those are, especially in a city like Seattle, are becoming fewer and far between, and so it's important to protect those. And that's balanced with the desire to make some of the investments around that light rail station. And so I'm going to engage in that conversation, and, you know, I've talked to those folks at Pepsi. I have not talked to the Dairy Gold folks, but I will certainly reach out to them, and I think those are important conversations to have.
Mike, a follow-up question on that. To keep the big boxes out of the neighborhoods, neighborhood commercial 3 zoning allows for unlimited store sizes, where you get these 100,000 and plus square
Okay.
foot size stores. Would you be willing to put forward legislation that would cap store sizes within the various zones? So N3C right now is, NC3 is open-ended. NC2, you can have a 25,000 square foot store, which is like a Bed Bath and Beyond, that sort of thing. And NC1, which is supposed to be our lowest, you can have a 10,000 square foot store. Would you be looking, or excuse me, I believe 15,000 square foot, would you be looking to lower those down? So when we talk about low-level neighborhood stores, we actually are getting
Yeah.
neighborhood-sized stores that don't require that automobile catchment, it's just more walkable catchment.
Absolutely, smaller spaces I think are a great tool. So I don't know the specifics on the NC3, 2, and 1 that you walked through, but yeah, those are the types of things. And you know, we talk about that a lot in other areas where we do rezones, or even working with contractors and trying to create even much smaller spaces to make what we think would be affordable for a startup business or a small business owner or an immigrant family that wants to start a business. You know, they can't rent the big corner Starbucks and that's all that's available. They don't have a foot in.
Okay, Mike, we're at your 10 o'clock deadline.
Okay.
Do you want to stay for another question or two, or?
I'm gonna stay for, let's see, yeah, I need to 25. I can stay for like 4 more minutes.
4 more minutes, okay, I'll let you pick the.
No,
Okay.
I'm not gonna do that. It's too politically.
Let's go with,
You're aware of Fremont, just ride the bike up it every once in a while. On 4200 Fremont, there's a bus zone. The last time there were 3 cars in there and I called the cops, it took over 2 hours for a parking enforcement to get there. An hour and a half, 2 hours is not uncommon. With the commitment to transit, and I know there's a lot more scooters out there, can you explain to me why this is acceptable conduct? And I've had times where I saw a bus driver, the car pointed in, parked in the bus zone, somebody sitting in it, he's pointing at the car, and the traffic enforcement officer, or the parking enforcement officer, wouldn't give them a ticket or make them move. This is what I see as a commitment to transit. Can the city do any better? I don't think you could get away with that on Capitol Hill.
let's see if we can have a question. Next question.
Yeah. Yes, the city can do better. It's not acceptable. I mean, thank you for raising that point.
Everybody has their stories, for sure.
It's like, do you get 2 questions by moving seats?
Oh,
I did, because
oh yeah,
Very
you fooled me.
tricky.
That's
I
all
would
right.
never be recognized behind him. But recently, this group
Speak
had...
up,
I'm sorry?
speak up, please.
Okay, recently this group had a presentation made to it about the sale of public spaces for advertising, and in particular digital advertising. And Mayor McGann is apparently kind of hell-bent on allowing the digital advertising industry to come into Seattle and supposedly help fund an improvement of Third Avenue, but the advertising industry says that it's not going to work that way. It has to be the entire city. To allow them to place digital advertising on all public bus stops and all kinds of places throughout the city. What is your position on that?
It's another one of those great areas. It's a good question. You know, on the one hand, we're struggling to fund transit, and we're looking for any source of revenue. And if we have revenue that we think we can get without raising taxes, you know, there's something that's pretty attractive to that. I opposed the idea of letting buildings put, you know, signs on the tops of them downtown Seattle. And frankly, I think one of the things that's really destroying our city, you know, all respect for the Pepsi bottling company, but these massive companies that just market to us and create this kind of consumption economy that where the only way we can all survive and have good jobs if we all consume more, which kind of undermines the health of our communities. And so putting more advertising on the streets, it really goes against what I believe in too. And so I don't know where that goes. I certainly don't think doing things citywide is where we want to be. On some issues around big billboards and stuff, we were running into some First Amendment free speech kind of challenges, and we have to figure out how we can do that smartly. But certainly in areas around bus stops where we don't allow it right now, and we're talking about expanding it, I think we have to be very cautious about it. But it's tempting because it's something we all care about, and I would rather find other revenue sources if we can do that to fund that.
Well, just as a follow-up, if you allow it on bus stops, for instance, the Metro now maintains those bus stops. But if you allow it on bus stops, Metro won't maintain them.
Yeah, I know the dynamic
And the
there.
city will be held on the hook, and Chicago, and San Francisco, and LA, and a whole number of cities
Yeah.
are now backpedaling on allowing.
So it's
this
costing more
first
than it's
place
generating.
because It's costing
Yeah.
more than it's generated, and I certainly
we'll be
hope
smart about
we
it.
don't get stuck there.
Dennis.
Last one.
Oh, I'm sorry. Dennis, right?
Is there still a dispute about 4 jobs?
I believe so. You know,
Feather bedding,
what's that?
feather bedding.
That's a term I'm not familiar with.
8 jobs, 4 for each.
Oh.
They did it with the railroad, they did it with the Teamsters.
I'm, you know, the city is not the lead on this project. There's something going on between the state and the contractor that I'm not totally in the loop with. It seems absurd to me that 4 jobs, as well-paying as they might be, are somehow holding up this multi-billion-dollar project. Yes, I said let's just pay them to go sit on the beach in Hawaii. It'd be quicker, but it's bigger than that. And I don't have. I know what I've read in the paper, frankly, on this, and a couple conversations I've had with WashDOT. So.
Questions related to our follow-up, and then I think we're going to be done here. How many donors do you have at this point in time? Roughly.
1,733.
1,700, okay. And if
A couple more since then, but pretty
if,
close.
if there were district elections, what was your district?
I am the same district as Nick Licata. We're both on the very edge of it, different edges, but I can't remember the names, but it's the Ballard district.
The Ballard district, okay, very good.
Yeah.
You have to go?
I have to
Thank
go.
you very much, Michael.
You all, thank you so much.